Chapter 14. We saw our first colonists only 2 days later. More rain had blown in and we retreated to the shearers' quarters for protection, huddling there as the timber creaked and whined and muttered. The rain came in squalls, rattling on the galvanized iron as though we were being roof-rocked. We took it in turns on sentry duty, keeping a 24-hour watch, but the weather was so bad that the work parties didn't return. We went and inspected what they'd done. The house was clean and tidy and the beds made. It was all ready for strangers, aliens, to move in and take over. It scared and upset me, trying to imagine these people sleeping in the Holmeses' bed, eating in their kitchen, walking their paddocks, and sowing their seeds in the Holmeses' earth. I supposed that our farm would go the same way soon. After 2 days the rain had stopped, though the sky was still grey, the air cold, and the ground wet and muddy. We decided to walk to Chris's place again when we got the chance, in case he'd turned up there. So at dusk, and despite the cold, rotten weather, we took our gear and marched off across the paddocks. Roads were too dangerous, so early in the evening, but we knew we could bypass Wirrawee and strike Marsden Marsh Road without much trouble, and that would put us close to the Langs. It was a silent walk for a while. Being cooped up for 2 more days hadn't improved our tempers, but the open spaces were good. It was nice to be able to breathe again. I felt myself relaxing after the first couple of Ks. I held Lee's hand for a while, but it was too hard to walk along in the dark like that. We needed both our hands for balance after our frequent stumbles. I dropped back and left Lee on his own and talked to Robin about movies we'd seen, which ones we liked and which ones we didn't. I had a great longing to see a movie again, to be able to look up at a vast screen in the darkness and watch beautiful people, beautifully dressed, saying clever and romantic things to each other. I supposed that in other parts of the world people were still making these films and other people were still watching them, but it was a hard thing to comprehend. We skirted around Wirrawee and got onto Marsden Marsh Road. It was now well after 10 o'clock and we thought we were safe on the road. It was a relief to be able to walk on it, and we made much better time, but also 2 Ks from Chris's we saw a house with lights on. It was a shock to us. It was the first we knew that power was being reconnected to rural houses. We stopped and looked in silence. It wasn't a welcome sight at all. In one way, it should have been comforting to see something that was so like old times. But life was different now. We were used to being feral animals, used to roaming the dark country at nights, used to running wild in the wild. If the colonists spread through the farmlands, reclaiming them with their lights and electricity and their own form of civilization, we would be forced further and further out to the edges, having to skulk in caves and burrows among the rocks. Still without a word being said, we moved towards the house. We'd become human moths. The house wasn't one I knew, but it was a comfortable-looking place. Solid brick with big wide windows and at least 3 chimneys. Shade trees grew around it and a neat garden with brick borders made a geometric pattern at the front. The borders nearly proved my downfall. I trod on one of the bricks and felt a spasm in my knee, which had been free of pain for several days now, but I recovered my balance, and when I tested my knee, it felt okay. I caught up with the others who had bunched behind a tree and were looking towards one of the lit windows. Bad strategy, I thought. A soldier with a gun could wipe them all out in less than a second. I whispered that to them when I got to the tree, and they looked startled but quickly spread out to the cover of other trees. I went around the eastern side of the house and found a peppercorn tree with wooden slats nailed to it, leading up to a kid's cubby, a tree house. I scaled the ladder and sat in the first fork. It gave me a dress circle view of the kitchen. I watched grimly. There were 3 women working in there. They looked quite at home. They were reorganizing everything. They had all the jars and plates and saucepans and cans out of the cupboards and spread across the tables and benches. They were wiping things down and putting them away, stopping every now and then to take a closer look at something, or to draw the attention of the others to it. There was a gadget with orange plastic handles made for getting the lids off of jars, and that seemed to fascinate them. I guess they couldn't work out what it was for. They were putting their fingers through the hole in the middle and waving them around, then trying to screw each other's noses off with it. They were laughing a lot. I could just hear their voices through the wall, sounding thin and high-pitched, almost a little nasal. But they looked like they were having a lot of fun. They seemed happy and excited. I felt such a mixture of feelings watching them. Jealousy, anger, fear, depression. I couldn't bear to see any more. I slipped down from the tree and went and found the others. Then we stole away through the garden and back to the road. Comparing notes as we walked along, we worked out that there were at least 8 adults in the house. I'd been assuming that they'd put one family on each farm, but perhaps they thought we were extravagant, having so much land between so few people. Perhaps they'd built houses all around the Wirrawee Valley till there was one family in each paddock, farming the land intensively. I didn't know how much the earth would cope with that, but then maybe we hadn't been making enough use of it. We trudged on, each quiet with private thoughts and theories and dreams. It was after midnight when we got to Chris's place. There were no lights on, but we were being terribly careful in case there were colonists asleep inside. But by then I was sick of tiptoeing. "Let's rock the roof," I suggested, thinking of the rain on the galvanized iron of the shearers' quarters back at Kevin's. The others looked at me pityingly, but I was in a dangerous mood, fed up with hiding and running and skulking around. "No, let's," I insisted. "What's going to happen? If anyone's in there, they're not going to rush out into the darkness with guns blazing. They wouldn't be that stupid. There's plenty of cover around so we can get away fast if we have to." My powers of persuasion were better than I'd realised, because within 30 seconds I'd talked them into it. I wasn't sure that I'd wanted to talk them into it. I'd been half joking, but to turn back now was to lose too much face. I reflected ruefully, picking up all the stones I could carry. We agreed on a place to meet if we got chased, then surrounded the house. At the signal, a long, frighteningly loud "coo-ee" from Homer, I let fly. It was quite exciting. A squadron of possums wearing football boots and wheeling defective supermarket trolleys at high speed might have made as much noise, but they'd have had to work at it. I backed away fast, biting my bottom lip in amazement and almost biting through it when I tripped over a garden seat. My shins and ankles certainly took a lot of punishment on these nighttime excursions. One lone rock, an unexpected afterthought from someone, suddenly clattered across the roof, a full minute after all the others. There was still not a murmur from inside the house. It was impossible that there could be anyone there after all. We gathered again near the front door and sent Homer to go and look through the kitchen window. After he admitted to throwing the extra rock, "It's too dark to see much," he grumbled. Then after looking a bit longer, he said, "I think it's the same as when we left that message for Chris. I don't think anyone's been here." And that's the way it was. It was a disheartening discovery. We checked the old piggery where Chris had hidden immediately after the invasion, but there was no sign of life there either. So we gathered around the dusty table in the musty kitchen, feeling tired and unhappy. The rush of excitement from the roof rocking had quickly gone. We were so upset about Chris, yet so helpless. The only guesses we could make about his whereabouts were depressing ones. I was annoyed with myself that I hadn't thought to ask Mrs. Mackenzie and the man in the machinery shed if they knew anything about him. But I'd been too confused and nervous. My only consolation was Robin's comment that if Chris had been caught and taken to the showground, the 2 adults would have mentioned it. "Well, no news is good news," Fee sighed. "Honestly, Fee," I snapped, "that's a great help. That must be one of the most stupid expressions I've ever invented." Fee looked hurt. It was after 1 o'clock and we were all tired, getting cold too. "There's just nothing more we can do," Homer said. "To tell you the truth, the most likely thing is that I hate to say this, that he's dead." We all squawked at Homer in outraged voices. We'd all thought of the possibility, of course, but to talk about it was to commit to an obscenity. It was too frightening and horrifying to hear anyone say it out loud. Perhaps we were scared that our saying it might make it real, might make it happen. I'd already learnt a lot about the power of words. "Well, what are we going to do?" Lee asked. "We can't stay here." "Yes, we can," Fee said. "I don't think it's too safe around here," Homer said. "The colonists are just up the road. We don't know how far they've spread, this side of town. They could be at the Langs tomorrow." "But it's so late," Fee said, "and I'm so tired and cold. I'm so sick of everything." She put her head down on her arms and she sat at the table. Lee patted her hair sympathetically, but the rest of us were too tired to do anything. "We could stay here for a few hours," Homer offered, "but we'd have to go again before dawn. I'd rather have a good sleep later than have a lousy sleep now." There was a silence as we all sat looking at Fee, hoping she'd give in gracefully. "Oh, all right," she said at last, crossly, shaking Lee's hand off and getting up. "Where are we going then?" "Let's go into Wirrawee," Homer said quickly. "We haven't been there for ages and we ought to have a look and see what's going on. See if there's anything we can do. If we leave now, we'll make it by dawn." We were too tired to argue. No one had any other ideas anyway. I was quite pleased to go to Wirrawee. I wanted to be as close to civilization as possible. I didn't want to see hell for quite a bit longer. It started raining again 10 minutes after we left Chris's. The smart thing to do would have been to turn around and go back and find a dry shed, but no one even suggested it. I think that having started, we couldn't contemplate making another decision. So we plodded on in silence, getting wetter and wetter. It was very dark, but we could stay on the road with no fears of getting caught, so we followed it easily enough. I don't think anyone spoke a word between our departure from Chris's and our arrival in Wirrawee. We got to the music teacher's house at daybreak, but the grey, wet light in the eastern sky was little different to the darkness of the night. 4 of us stood shivering in the garden, hiding behind trees, wet and dripping, while Homer searched the house to make sure it was empty. I wondered where he got his energy. He seemed to have more than me, more than anyone. But at last he signalled us in. We squelched inside miserably, found towels and blankets, and stripped off in the upstairs bathroom. Homer offered to do guard duty, and no one gave him an argument. Robin and Fee shared one bed, and I took another in the next bedroom. Lee disappeared down the corridor to the end room. I just hoped the house wouldn't get raided while we were all undressed, but there was no sign of anyone having been here since our last visit. I lay there, and as so often happened, having waited all night to get to a bed and get some sleep, now that I was in bed, my eyes wouldn't close. I had never felt more awake. The coarse woolen blanket prickled my skin, but in a nice way. It felt rough and primitive. For a long time I couldn't get warm, and I pressed my legs together and huddled further under the blankets, trying to hot up. Eventually the blankets covered me completely. I crossed my arms and put my hands into my armpits. My skin tingled as the blood started to circulate again, until only my feet were still cold. I put the right one on top of the left, willing them to thaw out. At last the warmth, the snugness, the coziness that I'd been needing for so long spread through me, till I could relax all over. I lay there, feeling luxurious. Then I heard a whisper. "Are you awake?" I popped my head out in shock. I felt like a possum coming out of a tree trunk, and I know my eyes were staring, and my hair was all mussed up from the blanket, so I probably looked like a possum too. It was Lee. "You look like a caterpillar again." "Not a possum?" "Yes, that too. Can I get in with you?" He was standing there wrapped in a blanket, shivering with cold. His brown eyes looked at me pleadingly. I felt a slow, warm burn of excitement, but tried not to show it. "No," I said. "I'm only wearing blankets." "That's what I was hoping. It's all I'm wearing too." "Lee, please?" "No, well, you can lie on the bed, I suppose, but that's all. And don't think," I added as he started quickly hopping over to me, "that you're going to sweet-talk me into anything else." "But my charm and personality." Yeah, I know all about that." He lay beside me with his head resting on his right arm, looking at me thoughtfully. He had the trace of a smile. "What are you thinking?" he asked presently. Oh, he'd caught me by surprise. It was too exciting having him this close. I was getting hot under the blankets. "I don't think I want to answer that." "Go on." I'll answer part of it. I was wondering why you were smiling. To my surprise, he didn't say anything for quite a while, but the smile had left his face. He looked very serious, like he was in church or something. Couldn't you sleep? I asked him. No, I don't sleep so well these days, not since that night by the cliff. I shuddered. Change the subject. He suddenly moved a little closer and kissed me hard. I kissed him back, possibly even harder. It was so fresh, but I didn't know where it might end, or where I wanted it to end. Gradually his kisses changed from hard and savage to soft and teasing, making little light contacts with my lips in one spot after another. It was exciting. We did that for quite a time, then lay with our heads on each other's shoulders. His blanket had slipped down a bit, though I was making sure that mine didn't. I felt the smooth hollow under his collarbone, his skin warm and alive. I nudged it with my lips, making little murmuring noises to it, and rubbed my hands up his arms. I found a little pulse under the skin and concentrated on kissing that. He was humming quietly, I thought, but I wasn't sure if it was his skin or his voice. He played with my hair and the back of my neck, stroking me with surprising confidence. With his long, fine fingers he teased my hair out, unravelling a few knots and letting the strands slide across his hands. Nice hair, he said at last. It's so oily, I complained. I like it. It feels natural. It's sexy. Thanks, I laughed. He must have taken that for encouragement, because he moved his hand down under the blanket for the first time, feeling for my shoulder blades. Oh, help, I thought. What do I do here? Dad always used to talk about the thin edge of the wedge, and I was afraid that this was it. I didn't want to stop, but I thought maybe we should, and I thought I might regret it if I didn't stop him soon. But it felt so good. Damn him, I thought. How does he know what I like? I wondered if I was having the same effect on him with my hands, and I experimentally ran my fingers down his side as far as I could get, which wasn't very far. His skin seemed to come out in goose pimples as I touched him, which was quite exciting. I lifted myself a little and touched his left nipple. Steve had taught me that boys' nipples were as sensitive as girls'. Lee's were different to Steve's, though. Steve had been pale and wide like fried eggs on his chest. I liked Lee's more. They were little and dark brown, like press studs. When I played with the left one, it hardened straight away, so I could strum it and tickle it with the tip of my finger.
Aye, 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 he said. Is that Thai or Vietnamese? Neither. Universal. Ha! My blanket was holding up at the front, but it was rolled down my back as Lee's hands kept roaming. I lay still for a while, feeling guilty that I wasn't doing more, but enjoying his touch too much. My skin had become so heated that I thought his hands would catch fire. I moved back off him a little, but couldn't help playing with his right nipple for a minute, just like I had the left. Then I ran my hand lower in a long sweeping movement, kissing him warmly as I did so. Are you going to be able to stop? I asked him. Sure. You're a terrible liar. By moving back off him that little bit, I'd given him more room. Trying to look casual, he put his hand under the blanket that was covering me at the front. At the same time kissed me hard to try and distract me, and I was easily distracted. I let him run his hands over my skin, thinking that what had been fair enough for him was fair enough for me. I rumpled his hair, feeling my face redden as he excited me more and more. Would I be able to stop? Would I want to stop? I already knew the answer to that, as I had done since he first came into the room. Oh, godly, I said, but I couldn't think of how I should finish the sentence. My own hands went further than they should have, down his waist and beyond. It was as though they had a life of their own. The hell with it, I thought. I'll do it. Last time we'd been in this house, I'd spent a lot of time wrapped in a tartan rug. That's when Lee had first called me a caterpillar, a beautiful, sexy caterpillar. Now a caterpillar again. I was emerging from a cocoon of blankets. Lee's hands were at my bum, and as he was rolling me over a little, I felt up inside his legs as high as I dared, but not quite touching everything. I sneaked a little look, though. It was fascinating. Such a wild-looking thing. So greedy, so determined. I knew Lee was looking at me too, and I was a bit embarrassed. Not very, though. It was obvious that he liked what he saw, and I secretly enjoyed the effect I was having on him. "Have you got a—" I asked, turning my head away a little. I didn't want to say a word. "A what?" he asked. "You know, a condom." "Oh no," he groaned. "Ellie, not that, not now." Okay, I said. "That's cool, just as long as you have the baby for me." "Jesus," Lee swore. "Do you have to?" "Yes. Can you imagine if I got pregnant?" He sulked for a minute, then said, "I think Homer's got some." "How many do you think you'll need?" I asked, giggling into my pillow. He started getting up. "Wait," I said. "What are you going to do? You can't just go and ask him for them." "I'm not that stupid," he said, still grumpy. "They're in his wallet, and his wallet should be in his trousers, and his trousers are in the bathroom drying." He disappeared out of the door, shuffling along in his blanket, and I lay there, smiling. I couldn't believe I was actually going to do it. I hoped I wouldn't muck it up, and that it wouldn't hurt too much, and that it would feel fantastic. I was nervous, but I was still aching all over with the need for him, the longing to feel him against me again. His warm hands had felt fantastic. I gave a little laugh out loud, a laugh of amazement and disbelief and excitement. It seemed ages before he came back, but at last he shuffled and flung himself on top of me, clutching a couple of little packets in his hand. With a shy grin, trying to do it as modestly as possible, he got himself out from his blanket and under mine. To feel our two naked bodies together, skin to skin, was the wildest feeling of my life. I thought I'd been all fired up before, but now it was like sparks were shooting off me. Lee had calmed down with the walk to the bathroom, and I'd cooled down too, but I warmed with him by rubbing against him, and felt him quickly react. "Put it on," I said at last, nodding at his clenched fist. He peeled one open and lifted himself off me, looking down so he could see what he was doing. I watched curiously. "Don't look," he said, blushing and trying to put his forearm over my eyes. "Oh," I said, "you're so cute when you're shy." When he was ready, I hugged him into me and nibbled his ear for a minute, before wrapping my legs around him. After that, it went okay. Not great, but okay. Lee got a bit clumsy, just from nerves, I think, and that made me a bit nervous, which didn't help. I wanted to be the great lover, the perfect lover, and I got worried that I wasn't being that. By the time he was really into me, he couldn't hold. By the time he was really in me, he couldn't hold on any longer. And after that, he wasn't as passionate. He just wanted to lie there and hold me. I made him a bit more creative until I had enough too. I made him be a bit more creative until I'd had enough too. I didn't know what I felt then, a mixture of things. I was pleased that I'd finally done it, without any disasters, sorry that it hadn't been better, wondering if it'd be completely different from now on, but I enjoyed the cuddling. For about half an hour we lay together, eyes closed, scratching each other's arms and backs with long lazy strokes, drifting in and out of sleep. We were interrupted by a soft knock on the door and Homer's whisper. "Ellie, it's your turn for sentry." "Okay," I called. "I'll be there." I waited a few more minutes, then eased Lee off me. I pulled up a blanket for covering, planning to go downstairs and get some dry clothes from my pack before I relieved Homer. But as I got to the door, I suddenly realised something. Homer had knocked on the door, then called his message through it. He had never done that before. He always just crashed in and shook me awake. We'd known each other so long we didn't bother with too many polite customs. I turned and looked at Lee, lying there on the bed. "Lee," I said, "why did Homer knock on the door?" "Eh?" he said, only half awake. "Why did Homer knock? Why didn't he come in banging in? Why didn't he come barging in like he usually does?" Suddenly he was awake. He looked at me guiltily. "Bastard," I said coldly. "I couldn't find the condoms," he said. "I had to ask him." I threw the door open and stormed out, spoiling the effect a bit by tripping over the blanket. I was furious. I didn't want Homer to know what we'd been doing. Once Homer knew, everyone would know. The only good thing about Lee telling him was that it kept me awake enough through my whole sentry turn. I spent the time having imaginary conversations with Lee. telling him what I thought of him. Anger's good like that.